This all happened when I was home from college for spring break. My friends and I decided to save our money during break in order to go on a big vacation over the summer. Fortunately for me, a family my mom knew needed someone to house sit while they were out of town and just wanted me to feed the dog, bring in mail, and be at the house overnight. They were going to pay very well, and the house was in a quiet neighborhood outside of a mid-sized city. It was a nice area with newer homes and nothing that would make you feel uneasy. I'd actually been to the house once before, so it didn't feel like I was stepping into a completely familiar place. The couple left that Saturday morning, and they gave me a quick rundown about the alarm system, the dog schedule, and where everything was. The dog was a golden retriever named Boomer, and he was very friendly and very low maintenance. Until about Sunday, everything was going well and felt normal. I had just let Boomer out into the backyard around 10:30 p.m. The yard was fenced in, with a wooden privacy fence about 6 feet tall. There was a motion light on the back of the house that lit up most of the yard. Boomer ran out like normal, but instead of wandering around, going straight to the grass like he used to do, he stopped near the middle of the yard and just stood there. I remember calling his name from the back door, thinking he was just being weird, but he didn't move. I never heard him do that before. I stepped out into the patio and looked around. The yard looked empty, the fence line, the corners, everything. "Boomer, come on," I said. He slowly backed up towards me, still facing the far corner of the yard. His ears were pinned back. That's when the motion light flickered. Not turned on, but just flickered, almost like something moved just the edge of its range. I didn't see anything clearly, but I saw enough movement near the fence to make me step back inside immediately, and as soon as Boomer got inside, I locked the door and watched through the glass. I stood there for a minute, just staring into the yard and trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe it was a stray animal, maybe something climbing the fence, something normal. Eventually, the light stayed steady again, so I closed the blinds and tried to move on with my night. Boomer wouldn't leave my side the entire time. Monday was normal again. No issues during the day, and I even checked in the backyard in the afternoon, and nothing was out of place. That night, I made sure to turn on all the exterior lights before letting Boomer out again. This time, he hesitated at the door. That alone made me uneasy. He went out, but he stayed right near the patio, constantly looking towards the same corner of the yard as the night before. I just watched him from inside. After maybe a minute, he suddenly turned and ran back to the door, scratching at it to be let back in. I opened it immediately and locked it behind him. He ran inside with his tail between his legs and got in between me and the door. Boomer started barking now, very aggressively right towards the door. I didn't move towards it, I just stood there staring at the outline of the blinds. I felt panicked and grabbed my phone. Something about the location, the backyard, the fence, made this whole situation feel immediately wrong. So I called the police. I heard footsteps walking across the patio and then disappearing. The officers showed up about 10 minutes later and checked the yard. One of them came back and asked me if anyone else was supposed to have access to the house. I said no, and the officer told me that the gate on the side of the house was unlatched. They never found anyone, but they took a report and told me to call again if anything else happened. I didn't sleep too much that night. I kept all the lights on and stayed in the living room with Boomer. Tuesday was quiet again, and I considered leaving, but I felt responsible for the house and for Boomer. Honestly, I didn't want to overreact if it was just someone messing around, or if I really was just imagining things, and I still wanted to get paid. That night, I double-checked everything. The doors were locked, the windows were locked, the alarm was armed. Around 1 a.m., I woke up to a soft thud coming from upstairs. Boomer's head shot up, and he let out a low growl. I sat there just listening. It sounded like footsteps coming from directly above me. I immediately grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering this time as to not let them hear me. The footsteps continued for a few seconds, and then they stopped. I stayed on the couch, barely breathing, just staring at the staircase. A minute later, I heard the faintest creak, like a door opening upstairs. Then, very clearly, a single step on the top stair. I can't really explain the feeling at that moment. It wasn't panic exactly. It was more like my body had locked up and I froze. Boomer started barking again, very loud this time, backing towards me again. Another step. Whoever was upstairs was coming down. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a heavy lamp, and just held it, even though I knew it wouldn't do much. The dispatcher was still on the line, telling me that officers were almost there. The footsteps stopped halfway down the stairs, and for a few seconds nothing happened. I heard movement again towards the back of the house, and then a door opening and slamming shut. By the time police had arrived, whoever had been inside was gone. They cleared the house and discovered an open window upstairs. The officer asked again if anyone else had access, and I told him no. The homeowners ended up coming back early, and they checked their security system logs. The alarm had been disarmed Monday afternoon, at a time when I wasn't even in the house. I'd gone out to grab food with a friend. Nothing in the house was stolen, and no one was ever caught, but the homeowners believe my side of the story, thankfully, and are just glad I wasn't hurt. I don't think I'll ever house sit for them again, even if they did pay me well. By the time I started to make enough money to go on spring break, I was a junior in college, and this was my first field trip without my parents. 4 of us drove down from the Midwest to Panama City Beach in my friend Tyler's beat-up old Honda Civic. It was one of those trips you talk about all semester like it's going to be the best week of your life. The first 2 days were exactly that: crowded beaches, cheap drinks, music everywhere, and not a lot of sleep. By the third night, everyone was pretty worn down. Tyler and Josh wanted to go back out, but I was exhausted and had been sunburnt, so I stayed back at the motel with my friend Ethan. The place we were staying at wasn't anything special. It was one of those older beachfront motels with exterior doors, the kind where the walkway runs along the second floor and looks down into the parking lot. Our room faced the lot and not the ocean, which I remember being annoyed about at the time. Around 11:30 that night, Tyler and Josh left. Ethan ordered food and knocked out pretty quickly after eating. I stayed up scrolling on my phone, sitting on the edge of one of the beds with the TV on low. The curtains were open just enough for me to see into the parking lot below. At some point, I noticed a guy standing near the vending machines. That alone wasn't weird. People were constantly coming in and going out, but he wasn't using the machine at all. He was just kind of standing there, and he wasn't on his phone or smoking, just facing towards the building. I went back to my phone, just glancing up every few minutes to see if he was still there. After about 10 more minutes is when I started to feel a bit off. I remember telling myself he was probably just waiting for someone. That made sense to me, but something was off about the way he was just standing completely still, with his hands in his pockets, and it just made it seem like he was looking up at the rooms. I got up and pulled the curtains closed the rest of the way. People watching was normal here, and everything was loud, chaotic, and crowded. Still, I locked the door. Not the handle lock, that was already locked, but the deadbolt and the chain. I sat back down, but I couldn't really focus on anything. After maybe 10 more minutes, I got up again and moved the curtain just enough to peek outside. He was gone now, and I remember feeling relieved. I shut the curtains back again and turned the TV up a little louder. Maybe 5 more minutes after that, there was a knock at the door. I froze for a second, expecting Ethan to wake up, but he didn't. I then walked over slowly and looked through the people, expecting it to be our friends. But it looked to be the same guy that was at the vending machines outside of our door. I remember up close, he looked even older than I expected. Late 30s maybe, and he had a baseball cap pulled low and he had some stubble. He looked upset. "Hello," I said through the door, and I didn't open it. He leaned in slightly, like he was trying to hear better. "Hey man, you got an extra lighter?" None of us smoked, so I said, "Nah, sorry." There was a pause after that, longer than it should have been and a little awkward. Then he said, "Are you sure?" I confirmed that we didn't have a lighter with us. Then another uncomfortable pause. I heard him step back from the door. I waited a few seconds and checked the people again. He was gone. At that point, I was definitely uneasy, but I still wasn't thinking anything serious. It was spring break and people were drunk, wandering around, knocking on the wrong doors. It was weird, but not weird enough to warrant calling the police. I went back to the bed, but I didn't sit down this time. I just stood there listening. About a minute later, I heard something metallic, like a faint rattling. It took me a second to realize it was coming from the door. I walked back over as quietly as I could and looked at the people again. I couldn't see him, but I could see the door handle moving. Not someone knocking or bumping into it, just turning it. Instantly my stomach dropped. I didn't say anything this time. I just stood there, watching the handle shift slightly back and forth, like he was testing it. Then the chain made a small, tight noise as the door moved maybe half an inch inward. I stepped back without thinking and grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking enough that I almost dropped it trying to get it open. I called the front desk first. It rang longer than I expected and no one answered. Then another knock came. Louder this time. "Hey," he said through the door. "I know you're in there." That's when I finally called 911. Ethan finally woke up around then, confused too. I put my hand over the phone for a second and told him quietly what was happening. He went from half asleep to fully alert in about 2 seconds. I kept my voice low, explaining the situation as quickly as I could. The operator told me to stay on the line and not open the door under any circumstances. While I was on the phone, I heard footsteps outside. Slow pacing footsteps, back and forth in front of our room. Then they just stopped. I checked the people again, and he was standing off to the side now, just barely out of view. And after what felt like forever, but was probably around 5 or 6 minutes, he saw flashing lights reflecting through the edges of the curtain. The footsteps outside stopped completely, and within a minute, there was a different knock, followed by someone saying, "Police." I looked through the people again, and saw it was a uniformed officer. I opened the door, keeping the chain on at first, then fully unlocked it once I was sure. Explained everything. One of the officers said they'd gotten a couple of calls that week about someone knocking on doors late at night, but no one had actually seen him trying to get inside before. They checked the area around the motel, but couldn't find him. The next morning, we found out from the motel manager that someone had tried to get into a room 2 floors down earlier that same night. Different group of people, but gave the same exact description of the man. Nothing else happened to us on that trip, but I couldn't shake it the rest of it, and during our drive back. A few weeks later, I called the local police department, just out of curiosity, but they told me they never caught anyone connected with the crime or incidents. I still think about how easily that door could have opened if we hadn't locked the chain, and it worries me to think he's still out there. To preface this, I was 21 at the time, studying abroad for a semester, and decided to meet up with 2 friends that were going to be in Barcelona over our spring break. None of us had been to Europe before, and we did pretty much everything our parents told us not to do while we were there. The first couple days were perfect. We went to the beaches during the day and hit the bars at night. By our 3rd night, we'd gotten pretty comfortable with the area and the whole scene. That night, we ended up at a bar a few blocks off the main tourist area. It wasn't sketchy at all, just quieter than the Strip. Fewer tourists and more locals around for sure. We stayed up there longer than we planned, and by the time we left, it was close to 2 a.m. My friends Nate and Connor decided to grab food from a place we passed earlier on the way to the bar. I wasn't that hungry, and honestly just wanted to get back to the Airbnb and sleep, so I told them I'd meet them back there, since it was only a 10-minute walk. I had my phone in case I needed directions, and the streets were still busy. After I started walking, and a few turns later, it got noticeably quieter, and about halfway back, I'd realized I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. It wasn't a huge deal, and I didn't stress about it too much. I just pulled out my phone and rerouted. That's when I noticed two guys standing across the street. They weren't doing anything obvious, just talking and smoking. But when I started walking again the opposite way, I had this weird feeling that they were watching me. I told myself I was being paranoid and just kept walking. After I turned a corner, I heard footsteps behind me, not super close and not far either. I glanced back casually and saw the same two guys rounding the corner, now walking in my direction. Again, I tried to rationalize it. Same direction, late night, it is what it is. But I was anxious about it anyways. Then I turned down a narrow side street, basically an alley really, and the footsteps got faster. That's when I knew something was wrong, and I started to panic. Before I can even turn around fully to look at them, one of them grabbed my back and yanked me hard enough that I lost my balance. I hit the wall shoulder first, and the other guy stepped in front of me immediately. Neither of them said anything at first. The one behind me shoved me again, this time harder, and I felt my head hit the wall. Not enough to knock me out, but definitely enough to disorient me. The guy said in front of me. He had a thick accent, but I could obviously understand what he meant. I hesitated for maybe half a second, but that was enough. The guy behind me reached into my pocket and pulled out my wallet. I remember saying, "Just take it," even though they already had it. The guy in front of me stepped closer, close enough that I could smell alcohol on his breath. Then he patted me down quickly, checking for anything else in my pockets. The whole ordeal lasted maybe 20 seconds. And before they left, the one behind me shoved me again, and I fell onward into my hands into a puddle. When I looked up, they were already gone. They just disappeared to the dark street behind me. Then the adrenaline hit. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely stand up, and my shoulder hurt, and I could feel a bump forming on the side of my head. I stumbled back into the main street, found the first open store that I could, a small convenience store, and the guy working there didn't speak much English, but he understood enough when I said robbed and put into my pockets. Fortunately, he let me use his phone. I called Nate first, but he didn't answer. Then I tried Connor, and thankfully he picked up. I don't even remember exactly what I said, just that I needed them to come get me. They showed up about 15 minutes later, and we went straight to the police station. Filing the report was slow. There was a language barrier, a lot of paperwork, and questions that I didn't fully understand. They asked for descriptions and the directions they ran. One of the officers told me muggings like that weren't uncommon in less crowded areas late at night like that. But that didn't make me feel any better. I ended up going to a clinic the next morning to get checked out. I had a mild concussion, a badly bruised shoulder, but nothing that serious. But it was enough to make the whole thing feel very real. We stayed for the rest of the trip, but took it a lot easier after that. I was super paranoid about everything for the entire time we stayed there. What stuck with me the most wasn't the violence. It was how fast it all happened, and how easily I walked myself into it. If I just stayed with my friends, or taken a bus, or even just avoided that one street, none of this would have happened. The first time I ever left the country without my family was when I went to Cancun with 3 friends for spring break. And like most people our age, we were more focused on having fun than being careful. We stayed at an all-inclusive resort, which felt pretty safe due to the security at the entrance and staff everywhere. It definitely gave us the false sense of nothing bad could happen really. On our 4th day, we decided to go off-resort to check out some shops and restaurants in the city, and I wanted to try authentic local food. We got a taxi there without any issues. We walked around for a couple hours, bought some souvenirs, and I got my food. We had no issues until the sun started to set, and our main problem started when we tried to get back. We flagged down a taxi on the street instead of calling one through the hotel, not even thinking about why they told us to do so. There were 4 of us, but the driver said he could only take 3. My friends David, Jackson, and Kyle got in first. We figured I'd just grab the next as there was another taxi right behind this one. I didn't have a second thought about this plan. as my taxi looked similar enough and in the same general color with no obvious red flags. I got in the back seat and told the driver the name of our resort. He nodded and just grumbled. At first, everything seemed fine. We just drove the same direction I remember coming from. Then, after about 5 minutes, he turned onto a road I didn't recognize at all. I pulled up Google Maps on my phone and noticed we were going the wrong way. "Hey, I think you missed it," I said, trying to sound casual. He didn't respond. That's when I noticed his phone mounted on the dash. It wasn't showing navigation. It was just a blank screen and my stomach dropped. I checked my own phone again. The route back to the resort was behind us. "Can you turn around?" I asked. He said something in Spanish I didn't fully understand, but he didn't slow down. At that point, I called Kyle and immediately told him something was wrong. I tried to explain where I was, but I didn't even know myself. All I could see outside were darker, less crowded streets, fewer lights and fewer people than there were before. The driver glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and he could tell I was panicking. I told Kyle to call the resort and the police. I don't even know if that made sense at all at the moment, but I needed someone else to know what was happening. Then the driver reached around and turned the radio up, loudly, almost like he was trying to drown me out. That's when I made a decision I didn't fully think about. At the next slowdown, coming to a turn, I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and jumped out. I hit the pavement hard. My hands and knees scraped immediately, and I rolled onto my side. My taxi slowed for a second and then sped right off. I just laid there for a few seconds trying to breathe. My heart was racing so fast it felt like I might pass out. A couple walking nearby ran over to me. They didn't speak much English, but they held me up and sat me on the curb. I must have looked as bad as I felt because they flagged down another car almost immediately. This time it was a marked taxi. I was hesitant to get in at first, but the couple stayed with me and talked to the driver before I got in to make sure it was okay. When I finally got back to the resort, I was relieved, and my friends were already at the entrance with security. Jess had actually called the local police and resort staff, so I ended up giving a statement that night. I explained everything I could remember about the driver and the car. The resort took it very seriously. They told us to never take unverified taxis again, and helped arrange transportation for us for the rest of our trip. The worst part was not knowing exactly what would have happened if I hadn't jumped out, and realizing how easily I could have just disappeared into a place I didn't know, with no one around who could help me.